Lucas Grant sat in the corner of the high-end Manhattan restaurant, the city lights flickering beyond the glass wall like restless stars. To the world, he was the golden man, a self-made billionaire, a visionary CEO whose face was on every magazine cover, whose empire stretched across continents. Yet, as he swirled the amber liquid in his glass, he felt the same suffocating emptiness that no amount of success could drown. At 38, Lucas had everything men claimed to want: power, wealth, fame. But what he didn't have was someone who cared about him. Not his last name, not his balance sheet, not the legend he had become. His assistant had arranged the reservation under a fake name, as if shielding his privacy from a world he'd long ago stopped belonging to. His best friend and business partner Ryan had insisted this was what he needed. One final blind date, he'd said, before you give up on love for good. Lucas had laughed, dry and bitter. He didn't believe in love anymore. He believed in mergers, in loyalty that came with signatures, in people who smiled until the ink dried. Love was a luxury for those who didn't know the cost of trust. Still, here he was, checking his watch for the 5th time, already regretting the joke of an evening. The waiter refilled his glass and Lucas nodded absently, lost in his thoughts. Then the door opened and his breath caught. She walked in quietly, unaware that every head had turned. She wasn't like the women who usually moved in his circles. No diamond jewelry, no expensive perfume announcing her arrival. She wore a soft cream dress that hugged her gently, her chestnut brown hair loose around her shoulders. She looked real, not flawless, but effortlessly beautiful, the kind of beauty that came from warmth rather than wealth. Her eyes swept the room, calm yet searching, until they found him. And when they did, Lucas felt something shift deep inside him, a sensation both unfamiliar and unsettling. She walked over with quiet confidence and said in a voice that felt like a melody, "Lucas Grant." He nodded, standing up automatically, his composure wavering for the first time in years. "Yes," he replied. "And you must be," she smiled, "Amelia Brooks." Her handshake was firm yet gentle, her eyes steady, seeing right through his polished exterior. As they sat down, Lucas couldn't help but notice how she didn't fidget, didn't pretend to be impressed, didn't fill the silence with nervous chatter. Instead, she looked around, then back at him, and said softly, "You know, for someone who thought this was a joke, you look awfully serious." Lucas blinked. "Occupational hazard," he said with a wry smile. "I take everything seriously, even blind dates?" She teased. "Especially blind dates," he countered, and she laughed, a genuine, rich laugh that melted something frozen inside him. Dinner passed in a blur of conversation that felt strangely easy. They talked about everything except business, books, childhood dreams, favorite places, regrets. Amelia told him she was a school counselor, helping kids find their purpose when the world made them feel small. Her eyes glowed when she spoke of her students, of the quiet victories that never made headlines but mattered more than anyone realized. Lucas found himself listening, really listening, not out of politeness but fascination. She wasn't trying to impress him, and that was what impressed him most. He confessed, half reluctantly, that despite his success, he often felt disconnected, like his own life had become a performance. Amelia nodded thoughtfully. "You know," she said softly, "loneliness doesn't care how rich you are. It just wants a place to live." Her words hit him harder than any business loss ever had. By dessert, Lucas realized hours had passed without him checking his phone once. She made him forget. The deals, the deadlines, the hollow noise of success. When they finally stepped out into the cool night, he felt reluctant to let her go. "I didn't expect to enjoy tonight," he admitted quietly. "That makes two of us," she smiled. "But sometimes life surprises us when we stop expecting it to." He wanted to ask her to stay, to see her again, but something about her calmness told him she wasn't someone you rushed. She left him with a soft handshake and a promise. "Maybe I'll see you again." And then she was gone. Lucas stood there, watching her disappear into the city lights, feeling something he hadn't felt in years: hope. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that Amelia Brooks hadn't come to that restaurant because of Ryan's arrangement. She hadn't come looking for love. She had come looking for closure. Years ago, when Lucas had signed a deal to expand his company, a single cold-hearted decision had resulted in the closure of a small educational program. a program that had belonged to her late father. That one deal had shattered her family's stability, forcing her to rebuild her life from the ground up. She had agreed to meet him, not to date him, but to confront him. But sitting across from him, seeing not the ruthless CEO but the lonely man behind the suit, had made her question everything she'd planned to say. Maybe fate wasn't cruel after all. Maybe it was merciful, giving two broken souls a chance to heal each other. And as Lucas got into his car that night, replaying every word she'd said, every look she'd given, he realized something he hadn't in years. He didn't want to go back to being the man who laughed at the idea of love. He wanted to find her again, not as Lucas Grant, the billionaire CEO, but as the man who'd finally remembered what it felt like to feel. The next morning, Lucas woke up earlier than usual, his mind still replaying fragments of last night like an unfinished dream. The echo of Amelia's laughter, the softness in her tone when she'd said, "Loneliness doesn't care how rich you are," kept circling his thoughts like a whisper that refused to fade. He brewed his own coffee, something he hadn't done in years, and stood by the tall windows of his penthouse, watching the city wake up. The streets below were already pulsing with life, but for once the world outside felt slower, quieter. He thought about calling Ryan, demanding to know who had set him up with Amelia, but then stopped. Maybe he didn't want to know. There was something real about her, something unplanned, unfiltered. He had met hundreds of people who wanted something from him, but Amelia had wanted nothing, not even a second meeting. That thought both intrigued and unsettled him. For a man used to control, not knowing where she came from, what she was hiding, or whether he'd ever see her again felt like standing at the edge of something dangerous and beautiful. At the office, his employees noticed something different. The CEO, who once stormed through the building like a machine, now moved slower, more thoughtful. Even his assistant, Claire, blinked in surprise when he smiled, genuinely smiled, during a morning briefing. "Sir, are you feeling okay?" she asked hesitantly. "Never better," Lucas replied, scanning the agenda but barely processing it. His mind kept wandering back to Amelia. He found himself searching for her online, typing Amelia Brooks, school counselor, New York, but there were too many. And even if he found her, what would he say? "Hi, I can't stop thinking about you after one dinner." It sounded ridiculous, yet the urge to see her again grew with every passing hour. That evening, while reviewing proposals, he came across a file labeled Community Restoration Initiative. It mentioned an educational fund for underprivileged schools, a proposal that had been buried months ago. Something about it caught his attention. He read through it and froze when he reached the last page. The foundation had been established in memory of Michael Brooks, Amelia's father. His chest tightened. The same last name, the same dedication to education. Suddenly pieces began to fall into place, and the reality hit him like cold rain. Amelia's father had been one of the small business owners his expansion deal had wiped out. Lucas leaned back in his chair, his heart pounding. She had known who he was all along. The blind date hadn't been an accident. It had been deliberate. But why hadn't she confronted him? Why hadn't she said anything? Was her kindness just an act, or had something changed when they met? The same way something had changed inside him. For the first time in years, Lucas felt guilt. Not the convenient kind that could be buried under donations or press releases, but the kind that dug deep, sharp, and personal. He'd built his empire by making decisions that hurt people he never had to face. But now, one of those faces had a name, a voice, a laugh that haunted him. Amelia Brooks III. Nights later, he found himself parked across the street from the small public school mentioned in the file. It was nearly sunset, and children were streaming out, laughing and running toward waiting parents. And then he saw her, Amelia, standing by the gate, holding a box of supplies, smiling as she talked to a student. She wore a simple cardigan over her dress, her hair tied back loosely, her expression calm but tired. Lucas hesitated for a long moment, unsure what he was even doing there. But before he could change his mind, a little boy tripped and fell nearby, scraping his knee. Amelia knelt instantly, comforting the child with a patience and gentleness that made Lucas's throat tighten. She wasn't pretending. This was who she really was, the woman who cared deeply, even when the world didn't care back. He stepped out of the car and crossed the street, each step heavier than the last. "Amelia," he said softly, his voice uncertain. She turned, her eyes widening in surprise.